Well, in answering the question of who is St. Patrick, we're very fortunate in actually having two Latin texts that were written by St. Patrick that survive. They're actually the oldest documents in Irish history. One, and the most famous, is Patrick's Confession, which is a document in which he gives a raison d'etre for his mission in Ireland. The second document is a letter which he writes to an individual called Coroticus, who has actually murdered some of Patrick's converts and enslaved some others. From the document known as his Confession, Patrick tells us that he was the son of a deacon and the grandson of a priest, that he came from a place called Banavem Taberniae, although we don't know where that was, but it's most possibly in Britain. He tells us that he was enslaved at the age of 16 and that he was brought to Ireland, and in his confession he describes tending herds on the hillside, and he talks about, praying to God over 100 times by day and another 100 times by night. Patrick eventually manages to escape his captors and he returns home. But a short period of time after that, he describes having a vision or a dream in which an individual named Victor comes to see him, and he presents him with a letter entitled The Voice of the Irish. And he refers to hearing, as it were, the voices of the people of the wood of Foclut, he describes, which is on the western seaboard. And these voices call him to come and to walk amongst the Irish once again. And with that, Patrick realizes his mission, and he decides that God is calling him to work among the Irish people. We know that Patrick wasn't the first person to bring Christianity to Ireland. We know that there was a bishop called Palladius who was sent by the Pope in the year 431 to the Irish believing in Christ. So there were Christians in Ireland before Patrick, but it is Patrick's legacy which has endured. We know that Patrick, or we have an idea that Patrick may have worked in the northern part of the country, principally among those who were not yet converted. And in his letters, in his confession, he refers to the conversion of literally thousands of people, sons and daughters of the Irish, who come to belief in Christ. He's fiercely protective of his new converts, and he is willing to lay down his life for them. He tells us this in his confession. He's willing to face martyrdom. Patrick was not without his enemies in Ireland, and indeed the writing of his confession seems to suggest that it was a way of presenting his mission in a positive light to show how committed he was to his mission to the Irish people. So he endured many hardships in Ireland, but he persevered in his mission. While Bishop Palladius is probably less well known today than he may have been at the time, it is certainly Patrick's legacy which has endured. It is Patrick who brought the faith to the great bulk of the unconverted Irish people in the 5th century. Does Patrick have a message or a relevance to people today? Yes, I think he certainly does. And indeed, from looking at the historical documents, the historical Patrick, I think, is a far more impressive Patrick than the Patrick of legend. 3 points I would mention in particular regarding Patrick. One of the things that comes across to us is Patrick's deep humility. In the confession, he describes himself as being a stone lying in deep mud until Christ took him and raised him up, placing him, as he said, at the top of the wall. He's under no illusion about his own inadequacies or his own sinfulness. He refers to his youth, his misspent youth, but he doesn't allow that misspent youth to affect the mission that he's been called to by Christ, to which he has a full commitment. That's the first thing, his humility. The second thing I think that we must remember is Patrick was very much a self-imposed exile in Ireland. He had a deep commitment to his mission to the Irish people, he tells us in his letters. And while he tells us often that he would dearly love to return to his family and relatives in Britain, that he will not do so because he is committed to living amongst the Irish people and indeed to dying, if that was necessary, amongst the Irish people. And on that point, I think Patick's courage as well must be underlined. Patick faced, as he says in his letters to us, robbery, enslavement, and possible martyrdom each day. And he asks God that if it be his will, that he would be martyred, not in any other place, only amongst the Irish people to whom he has given his life. So I think those three things, his humility, the fact that he persevered as a self-imposed exile in what was essentially a strange land, and thirdly, his great courage and his mission and his perseverance. I think these are lessons that we could learn from today.